Hi there, everybody. My name is Danielle Gage. I'm one of the contributing writers at Residence 11. Residence 11 is a website and community that celebrates sensuality, romance, intimacy, and loving in the new age of human connection. We're gearing up for our first ever live event called the Residence 11 Desire Summit on sex and relationships, which will be held in Los Angeles and live streamed on February 11th. We are here today speaking with sex educator and author Allison Moon. Allison Moon is the author of 5 books, including the critically acclaimed sex education guide, Girl Sex 101, as well as Getting It, a guide to hot, healthy hookups and shame-free sex, the erotic memoir Bad Dyke, as well as the novels Lunatic, Fringe, and Hungry Ghost. Allison is a popular sex educator, leading workshops on sexual pleasure and technique, polyamory, LGBTQ+ issues, and much more. She's been quoted in Cosmopolitan, New York Magazine, and the Washington Post. Allison has presented her workshops on strap-on sex, polyamory, sexual self-expression, erotica writing, and more to thousands of people across the US and Canada. Allison will also be speaking at our upcoming Residence 11 Summit, speaking on the topic of alternative sexuality in fiction. Don't forget to hit subscribe wherever you're watching so you don't miss out on any upcoming interviews. So, Allison, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Danielle. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Ready to jump in?
Sure.
Okay. So the first question we have is, what were you taught about sex growing up, and how has your perspective on sex changed from what you were taught since then?
Ooh, that's a great question. I mean, I think like a lot of people growing up in the American Midwest, at least, I was taught some pretty good stuff around, understanding myself and understanding what I wanted. But it all was from a very monogamous centric, wait until marriage centric, and just this kind of notion of just monogamy, marriage, the traditional kind of Western story around sex and desire, which I appreciated, but was also fairly incomplete. The one thing that I think that was really special that my parents did was that my father was a nurse. So it was very important to him that my sister and I knew all the right words for things. So yeah, it was great. So basically what that meant is that I ended up getting an education, even though in my Catholic school, obviously that was not something that was given to me. My parents, by teaching me that, allowed me to become a little bit of an oracle to my fellow students, because I was the one who was teaching the kindergartners the words scrotum and vulva when my peers had no idea what those things were. So I think that gave me a little bit more of a comfort with that kind of language, and a comfort with those kinds of concepts from a very early age, which allowed me to stay inquisitive throughout my entire life.
Yeah, that's great. That's really good.
Yeah.
And so there was a religious element as well. So it was the monogamy, and also then, wow, okay. Well, that's great that you got your father.
Stuff, and then also, well, the Catholic stuff was a little bit less helpful in the long run.
Catholic schoolgirls.
Yeah.
So you're a sex educator who's taught workshops for thousands of people. What inspired you the most to get involved in this field?
I mean, kind of like what I just said about being the kid who knew the answers to things. And I liked that. I'm a know-it-all. And so for me, a lot of my sex education peers, we were that kid. We didn't necessarily have all the answers, but we were self-taught enough to actually come up with more accurate answers than maybe these kids were getting from their families or certainly their sex education. So I liked being that kid all throughout my youth that my friends would come to with questions. And even as I became an adult, I never stopped liking being that person. So maybe the questions when I was a child would be more rudimentary about periods or about masturbation. But as I got older, then the questions would be more about romance and relationships and queer stuff and kink. And I just kept on learning and kept on enjoying being able to share that information that I learned and distill it down to, reasonable and kind of shameless conversations with my peers.
Yeah, that's great. And this is a good one. What are the most common questions that you get asked about sex?
Oh my gosh. I mean, I think a lot of the questions are very much the same that everyone gets, which is, am I normal? Am I broken? Is this okay?
Wow.
Yeah. And I think that, again, that hasn't really changed my entire life. And as I get older now, I still find people asking me like, I can't come without a vibrator. Is that normal? fantasize about threesomes, but I'm monogamous with my partner. Is that normal? And all these different things where people just want validation that maybe they're not broken. That's kind of where that's at.
Wow. Yeah. Because my second question to that was also, are there perennial questions that continue to come, since obviously sex is changing rapidly and always does, if it has changed through your career? But it sounds like that is the theme, that people kind of have this constant concern of normalcy, or?
Yeah, I think the one thing that I have noticed change is that as the internet has become this oracle for everything, and correct answers and incorrect answers alike,
Right.
I find that the questions about the mechanics of sex have gotten much less, because porn is ubiquitous, again, for better and for worse. So it's pretty easy to find answers to, like, what is rimming? But what's harder to find is answers about relationships, and answers about deciding what you want, and answers about finding out what sexual self-expression you want to share with the world. That stuff is not very easily Googleable. So the questions I've noticed have become more sophisticated, more heart-based, more emotion-based, more spiritual-based.
Yeah, almost, maybe.
Yeah, because they're harder to find. I find that when I teach at colleges, most of the college groups don't want, strap-on sex or cunnilingus or any of the kind of mechanical stuff. They want how do I navigate opening a relationship, or how do I decide if I want to be monogamous with a partner? Just matters of the heart, which I find really fascinating, and to a certain degree kind of lovely that we're able to now consider more complexity in our sexual lives, and more opportunities and options.
Sure. Yeah. And those things have always been there. It's just always been hidden now. So now we're at a point where we can discuss it openly, which is fantastic.
Absolutely.
Cool. So the next question is, you were speaking with us and for us at the Desire Summit on February 11th with the lifestyle author Taylor Hahn about the alternative sexuality in fiction. Can you tell us a little bit more about the novels Lunatic, Fringe, and Hungry Ghost that you've written, and the role that alternative sexuality plays in fiction versus nonfiction?
Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah. So, no, this is great. I love your compound questions. Thank you. Yeah, I find that so Lunatic, Fringe, and Hungry Ghost are two books in the same series about lesbian werewolves. So very fantasy, very kind of new adult genre. And basically it follows a young woman who's going off to college for the first time and finds herself in this group of women who are kind of vaguely sorority-like, very ardent feminists. And she quickly discovers that they are also a pack of werewolves. And so she starts dating a werewolf and falling in love with a werewolf, and then she becomes a werewolf. And there are a number of different scenes around sexuality that I wanted to explore in these books. And I wanted to explore kind of what I consider to be an authentic lesbian experience around a lot of sex using hands, because I think that's something that often is not seen in either pornography or in fiction. So I wanted to kind of demonstrate, I wanted to basically just share a version of sexuality with readers that they might not get in a lot of different other kinds of romance books that you might read. And then to answer your second question, which I forgot what it was.
That's okay. What is the role that alternative sexuality plays in fiction versus nonfiction? But you kind of got but I mean, I'd love to hear more about that though. But I think that's great, the detail about it, because you're right, it's not something that's commonly seen or well known, I think. So
yeah. And I think, again, we can talk about this later, but just to say, I think that alternative sexuality, and again, kind of air quotes around that, the difference as a writer is that, in my nonfiction books, I'm much more didactic. I basically explain how things work and kind of, like I said, the mechanics of sex, and how, what cunnilingus can look like and different ways of doing it better than maybe you did before. And you have a little bit more license to be more didactic, more this is how this works, which again is what people are looking for in their nonfiction often. And in fiction, I think that sex can be more of an experience. You reading it along with the characters, and you want to experience it through the eyes of a character. So you might have more license to explore this kind of sexuality that you either cannot do because you don't have the right parts, or just don't do in your normal life. And so there's a lot more opportunity to use your imagination. In Girl Sex 101, I actually combine both. There's a fiction, a story that runs through the entire book that opens every chapter to illustrate the concepts later in that chapter. So on the book about on the chapter about strap-on sex, there's a sex scene between some characters that use strap-ons, and then go into the more didactic section, because I really know that people learn in different ways.
Yeah, no, fantastic.
Yeah, the idea of that came from because 50 Shades of Grey was hugely popular when I was writing Girl Sex 101, again, for better and for worse. But I realized that people around the world were reading erotica to learn about things that they didn't know how to do. And
Right.
not always great. But so as an educator, I realized that I had an opportunity to use my expertise to teach through fiction, knowing that some people learn better by following stories than they do by following a bullet point list.
Yeah, absolutely. An introduction through a more fantastical way. Yeah, that's very cool. So the next one is, in your opinion, do you think someone has to be involved in a given aspect of sexuality, especially alternative or non-mainstream sexuality, in order to write it well in fiction?
I think the word "well" is doing a lot of work in that sentence. I think that, again, this is like a perennial conversation in the world of writing and art in general. Like, can I write outside of my own understanding? And I think that it's limiting to suggest that we can't write things that we don't live. However, I think probably a lot of us have had the experience of watching a movie where there's a sex scene, or reading a book with a sex scene and being like, what? No, that's not how that works at all, or that's not sexy at all, or oh my God. And I think so where that becomes important is like I was discussing 50 Shades of Grey, when you are writing a text, even if it's just pure fantasy, people are going to be coming to it with curiosity about the thing that you're exploring sexually. And I think that it is imperative that the author do their due diligence to actually understand how the thing works in order to represent it accurately and fairly. And then you can have the freedom for fantasy all within there. But I think that people need to understand that they have a responsibility to represent communities with accuracy, sex acts with accuracy, because otherwise you're basically doing injustice to the reader, but also to yourself as a writer if you don't do the research required. And I think that I've noticed there's a trend in media lately to get more experts counseling with film directors and writers to get more accurate portrayals of certain things. But I think that trend only needs to continue to make sex more authentic, to make certain kinds of sexual minorities feel more authentically represented by the media that we are supposedly represented in. I think that there needs to be a lot more looking to sex experts to help kind of like open your aperture into what that sex act or that kind of sexual experience actually looks like.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. Yeah, it's a certain responsibility.
And it just makes your work better, right? Like, I don't know how many lesbian movies I've been like, turn off, because like they just clearly didn't talk to a lesbian.
Right. Clearly done by a guy or something. Yeah,
and it's upsetting. It's like you can make your art better when you actually speak to people who know what they're talking about.
Sure, absolutely. And so what advice would you have to someone looking to explore sexuality in fiction who's not sure where to start?
Ooh, like reading it or writing it?
I think writing it, but reading it sounds more fun. So where
I mean, I guess they're kind of go hand in hand. If you're interested in writing more sexuality in fiction, read as much as you can. Read widely and wildly, and explore. Like, find out what you like. And for me, reading like a writer is to find things that resonate with you, maybe erotica that turns you on, and then revisit it with a slightly more analytical mind. What about this is working for you? Is it just the writing style? Is it the characters? Is it the theme? And really kind of start to be a little bit more analytical about the way that a particularly good writer is doing something, and try to see how you can emulate that in your own style. But I also encourage people to just kind of explore a lot of different kinds of genres, things you might not think that you're into, just because it gives you an opportunity to understand what else is out there. And just kind of learn more about just the beautiful like kind of tapestry of sexuality in general, which again, I think as a sex educator, I don't have to do everything and like everything to want to understand everything.
Sure, that's a great point. Yeah. And lastly, what is up next for you? What are you working on? What's in the what's coming down the stream for you?
Sure. Well, I'm currently getting my MFA in creative writing for the performing arts. I've been moving a lot more. Thank you. I've been moving a lot more into the direction of dramatic writing. So I have a play that's getting some traction around sexuality, and I'm working on another play. I'm working on screenplays and teleplays and all the things. So I'm doing a lot of writing, and all of it is connected to sexuality in some ways, because sexuality is part of every human being's life, whether we engage with it or not. And so my whole mission as a writer is to include sexuality just as integrally to make sure that sex is just as integral to a character as anything else that they might do. And I think that's really important to me, to kind of represent sexuality as just another aspect of a personality and a life, not as something other that's only behind this like closed door all the time that we only open when we want to titillate, but rather exploring how sexual identity, desire, and relationship choices are all part of the human experience.
That's very cool. That's exciting too. We look forward to hearing more about it and what comes.
Thank you.
Yes. Well, thank you. And thank you for joining us today. That was a great talk. And we look forward to hearing more from you at the upcoming summit. And be sure to check out Allison's book and Girl Sex 101, and also Getting It, a guide to hot, healthy hookups and shame-free sex, which is exactly what we need to kick off 2023, I think. And also she can be found at girlsex101.com, which is her website. And you can find all of the good information there as well. And be sure also to, I'm sorry, Allison, was there another?
Oh yeah, if you're interested in just kind of hearing more about my explorations of the interaction between sexuality and art, I have a Patreon. It's patreon.com/artgasm. And that's a podcast. And also I have some other essays and some other readings. So that if you're interested in that kind of integration, once again, that word, if you're interested in that kind of integration, you can find more of my writing there at patreon.com/artgasm.
Perfect. Thank you. Sounds good.
Thank you.
So thank you for joining us again. And for any of our viewers out there, be sure to click and follow so you can watch all of our upcoming events and speaking events for the Resident 11 Summit Desire, Sex and Relationships. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Bye.